Hello everyone, welcome to our fourth video on visual social research methods. And for this video, we'll be talking about part 2 of designing visual research. So, as I explained earlier, there are many approaches that we can do in order for us to integrate visual methods in our studies. In qualitative research, this can be integrated as a supporting data over a larger research design, and this is what we discussed in our previous research on phenomenology, case study, ethnography, and narrative analysis. And also, there are research designs that are primarily revolving towards visual methods or visual data. And there are many approaches to do this. You can do visual content analysis, you can do quantitative analysis, you can do big data research if you are into computer science studies, you can do semiotic research if you're into cultural and media studies. But for our class, we're going to be talking about specifically photography-based designs that are enmeshed in narratives. But mainly, these designs were conceived primarily with photographs in mind, and this is going to be what we will be doing in our class later when we do our field work. And we will be talking about three related but also different designs that are photography based, and we have Photo-elicitation, Photovoice, and Photostories. So there are three readings that are the basis for these designs that we're going to be discussing, and a part of that journal article where we base this is screenshot here in this slide. So before we go on to the three specific research designs that are photography based, let's review our discussion in the first and second lectures. And these are what are the approaches in visual methods and where does our visual data come from when we do visual research. So one, the possibility for us is to produce research visual material. So for example, this could be visual ethnography, where you make use of your camera to be able to create visuals or store or document the visuals of cultural practices. This can also be doing film. So using the researcher is the one producing the visual materials, the ones that are producing the visual data. Second is participant-centered approaches to use of visual materials. So basically, this is where the participant or the informants are the ones who are taking the pictures in response to certain prompts. The third one is the analysis of existing visual materials. So probably there are posters or there are images in social media, and you wanted to look at what it means in social reality, just like the Instagram posts that we discussed in our previous lecture. That can also be the case. So no one's collecting primary data. We're doing secondary data analysis of images that are already present. And then number 4, the use of visual materials generated by visual technology. And this can be, like, for example, AI generated visuals or visuals that are created through film. So the focus is on the visual technologies that were used rather than the visual data. And for our purposes in this particular lecture and in the rest of our class, we'll talk about participant-centered approaches in the use of visual materials. And maybe we can also use some analysis of existing visual materials, especially when we go to photohistorias later. Alright, so let's talk about the first one on photo-elicitation from the article of Coops. And to define this, photo-elicitation is a qualitative strategy where researchers solicit responses, reactions, and insights from participants by using photographs or other images as stimuli. So the researcher makes use of photographs or images in order for the participant to be able to explore or talk about the phenomenon in greater detail with greater reflection, as opposed to just interviewing them, just having that conversation without any visual aid or visual material. And those who advocate for photo elicitation argue that selecting images should be able to garner reactions and emotional responses and meanings that may not be accessible using verbal methods or just conversational methods alone. So, as we all know and as we've discussed, emotions are emotion provoking. Emotions give give depth in terms of meanings across time and space and relationships, and it makes experiences more vivid. It makes more meanings more vivid. Now, the first variant of photo elicitation, which is usually where it is known for, is researcher driven. This is where the participants are asked to provide feedback on images that have been pre-selected by the researchers. So it is the researchers who make use of the images, who collects the images, who probably takes the images and makes use of those images to prompt responses or allow the participant to tell their stories on a specific phenomenon, as opposed to participant-driven, wherein the interviews is prompted by photographs that are taken by the participants themselves. There are also other forms or other ways that this is identified or defined in literature. Sometimes they're called autophotography or reflexive photography. Basically, it creates the opportunities for participants to be actively involved in the generation of the data, both visual data and verbal data through interviews. And participant-driven is also a way to address power dynamics in research. And we discussed this earlier that when it is the researcher showing the visuals, the researcher is the one who chose the picture. The researcher has some form of a larger agency of where to bring that conversation because the image is taken by them, as opposed to the participant who has more power to be able to direct the conversation because the conversation revolves around the photo that they have taken instead of the researcher. Later on, you might be confusing this with a later design that will be discussed, but usually photo elicitation, when you talk about this across disciplines, is usually thought about as the researcher driven, right? And when we do researcher driven photo elicitation, what phenomena or what research questions can that answer? So for example, you are in the field of psychology and you want to be able to look at implicit biases of people in terms of race or ethnicity, and you show them pictures of people of a given race or ethnicity, and you want to ask them about how they feel when that person is shown to them, and that will tell us about our implicit biases against or for a particular race or ethnic background. So that's an example of a research question for researcher driven. Another example of a research question for researcher driven may be, for instance, you're talking about environmental advocacy and environmental problems, and you have pre-selected pictures of environmental problems. Like for example, you take a picture or you get a picture of a polluted river, or let's say factories that are belching out a lot of smoke into the air, and then you ask your participants to express what they think about the picture and what they feel about the pictures that are being shown to them. So that's another research question that can be answered using a research-driven photo elicitation. Again, I'm going back to that idea that when you look into the literature, when you browse photo elicitation, some of them would say that photo elicitation has two variants, which is researcher driven and participant driven. Other literature would say that photo elicitation is generally the research driven and there's no participant-driven variant, and it might just be another design. So just for purposes that you will not be confused when you go through different literatures across disciplines. When we talk about photo-elicitation, we talk more in terms of the researcher-driven, which is where it is the researcher who takes the picture. Now, what are the common objects or the common subjects or phenomenon that can be studied in photo-elicitation interviews? So we can talk about social class or social organization. You can talk about like you show a picture of a family, you show a picture of a home and what they feel about it, or you show a picture of a campus and ask them how they feel about the campus, the extent of security that they feel in that particular campus. So that's one. Or you can talk about, you can show a picture of conspicuous consumption of branded materials, and you ask relatively poorer participants what they feel about luxury items, and to be able to understand how they feel about social classes and how strongly they feel about luxury items, so things like that. We can also study about community and historical ethnography, and again, pictures that are collected over time about the community tells us about the cultural history of that community, of that place, and again, the pictures, there can be a form of documentation. So again, but pictures can only say so much. So you can do interviews with probably elders in the community, so that you'll be able to what do you call this, to draw a story in terms of the pictures that come from the records of a given community. Next, we can also talk about identity. Identity is a common phenomenon that can be explored using photographs, right? So and then we can also talk about cultural studies. We can talk about mainstream media, pop culture, and again, how does that influence a person's thinking and actually identity as well. But you can also study so many other things aside from these ones that are commonly used in the early days of photo-elicitation. You can talk about topics in communication, about how a representation, right, of people, about race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality based on pictures that are available. You can also talk about deviant behavior, crime, and you'll be able to read an example from the work of Copes. And then you can also talk about media studies, right? We can talk about how production of certain images by the media influences certain people or groups of people. And also photo-elicitation can also be studied in terms of health, like for example, how caregivers relate to the sickness of their members, etc., how families react to the health or to the illness of their particular members. And then of course another example would be pictures of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how that how pictures reflect a story. So that is for your photo. So those are some of your phenomenon for photo-elicitation. So what are the general steps that we take when we do photo-elicitation? So of course we do some form of preparation where we ask the research question, we collect the literature to be able for us to narrow down the research question, develop the phenomenon, develop our research framework, develop our theoretical background, right? And then we create a sampling plan, who are the best persons for us to be able to interview, and what will be our data collection processes. So if it's an interview, you have to have an interview guide, you have to also prepare your audio recording devices, you also have to prepare the venue where you will do your interview, and then of course you will have to do your recruitment as well. If you're doing a researcher-driven photo elicitation, the photo collection and the photo selection usually happens prior to recruitment, right? So you collect available photos that you think would be candidates for you to use later for your interview, and then you with your research team and with an expert panel, you probably choose the pictures that you would have to show to your participants when you do the interview. And of course, you might need to edit your interview guide so that it will kind of really flesh out what you want from the photo and of course the phenomenon that you really want to explore. Uh, but for participant-driven recruitment happens first because the photo collection is done by the participants. Next, of course, we have the actual interview, and then we show them the picture, and then we kind of interview them based on that using open-ended questions. Of course, in this lecture, I won't be able to fully explain those things, so we'll explain those more during field work. And then we have, of course, data analysis, which we'll have a separate discussion on. And then, of course, finally reporting the findings of your research. The second design that we're going to be talking about is Photovoice. So, Photovoice is typically used with marginalized groups. Photovoice participants identify, document, and represent their community strengths and concerns from their own perspective through the use of a specific photographic technique. And this has been conceived by Wang in 1999. And of course, they also have a partner called Buris. And basically, the target of Photovoice are vulnerable populations, no? Usually populations who are minoritized. And some would even argue that Photovoice should also be community-based, right? There are, again, disciplines that say that Photovoice is a particular form of participant-driven photo elicitation, but I guess it's safer for us to say that Photovoice is in its own art, right? It's its own design, and because it has its own ontology, it also has its own epistemology, it has its own methodology that may be close with photo elicitation, but at the same time, it has its different axiology. Axiology meaning this is the value that you take highly when you do research. And basically what we value here is really critique against oppressive structures. And it's based on empowerment education for critical consciousness. So for people who are living in oppressive structures or under oppressive structures, living in the margins, they may not be able to realize yet their capacities and the barriers that they are facing. And through Photovoice, what a goal that we want is that these communities, these people, these marginalized populations, they will have more idea of of what their place in society is and how they can kind of push back and kind of control the narrative and increase their agency and increase their control over their lives. It's also based on feminist theory, again, that critiques current social systems, not only due to gender, but we also talk about intersectionality like class, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. And also, it is based on documentary photography, meaning we want to be able to capture the lives of people and learn about the lives of people using photographs. So, according to Wang and Boris, there are three objectives of Photovoice, and if this is not met, then maybe that is just a simple photo elicitation technique. So the first one is for participants to identify, record, and reflect on their community needs or their personal needs as well. So that is what we want them to do, for them to be able to identify the struggles, identify their needs, identify the shortages that they're experiencing, the gaps, etc. Number two is to be able to promote critical dialogue, because in this procedure, after photo documenting their struggles or their experiences or their everyday lives, we elicit conversations with these people. Number three is to reach policymakers to enact social change toward community improvement. So we make use of the images and the results from the discussions that emanate from those pictures as the as a vehicle for the policymakers to have a vivid understanding of what is happening in the community and to compel them to act and build initiatives, programs, and policies for them to be able to, address the gaps of that deter the well-being of the people in a given community and probably raise that standards of living for them. Wang and Boris also has a particular research process that may not be seen in photo-elicitation. And the Photovoice research process has these steps. The first one is to select and recruit a target audience of policymakers or community leaders who we believe will be able to address the gaps that we will find out later on. And then number two, we recruit a group of Photovoice participants, and we want them to be able, when the criteria for them is to be able to have a rich experience, a rich embeddedness in the community, so that they'll be able to document really what is happening. Number three is to introduce the Photovoice methodology to the participants and facilitate a group discussion on how it's going to be done, so that the participants do this correctly, because there's some skill that is needed for them to do photo documentation, and then eventually they need to be prompted for the discussions that they have to do. Next, is important to obtain informed consent. We'll have a separate discussion on ethics later. And then pose an initial theme for taking pictures. So what would be the prompt? For example, take a picture of what it means to be a single mother for you. If the community or the group of people that you're targeting are single mothers, then that could be a prompt for them, right? Or it could be general, as a woman in this community, what do you think are, take a picture of areas in the community that you feel must be addressed. So they can take pictures of where the problems are in the community, right? So there are many ways that the researcher can attack this. So it's based on the researcher's creativity, the researcher's intent, and also the phenomenon that we want to study. Although in this case, when you talk about phenomenon here, the phenomenon is basically a construct that is going to be integratively developed, because again, it is the participants who lead. The participants lead in the development of what really needs to be studied based on the photographs that they take, based on the prompts that you give them. Next, we distribute cameras to participants to review how to use them. So in 1990s, we used disposable cameras for us to do this. However, now there are, because of increased technology, and like everybody has a smartphone of differing HD, differing definitions or differing specs. But most of us, we have a photograph to the hand. So some researchers can forgo giving disposable cameras, although purists who do Photovoice still use disposable cameras. I personally do not advocate that because it's disposable. And as someone who doesn't want to create extra waste, if the participants have digital technologies with them for them to take pictures, then they can use that. Of course, this is different for those who don't have access to technology. Then you would really give them disposable cameras. But for populations who already have photographs, maybe they could use that, or maybe the participants could lend them. The discussions on whether the cameras have to be owned by the participant or given by the researcher, there are different takes about it. So just so you know, when you read one Photovoice study and you read another Photovoice study, you will see a lot of opinions. So just so you know. And then, of course, you provide time for participants to take their pictures. There are photo voice processes wherein they give one whole afternoon for the features, and then they do the discussions immediately after. There are those who ask the participants to collect the data over time, or collect the photos over time, and then they meet with the participants, and then they kind of discuss based on that, long period of collecting photographs. And then you meet to discuss the photographs. Usually, what is used in Photovoice is FGDs in classical ones. We do focus group discussions. We kind of talk about it with the community, with the community members who are doing the Photovoice. And there is a particular focus group discussion guide for Photovoice. And when the usually what happens is that it could be that the participant is initiated to take many photographs, and then at the end of taking those photographs, the participant is asked to share one or two or three of them in that focus group discussion. And when that participant shows that picture to the team, this is what the researcher asks as a prompt for the discussion. So they use the showed method. So what do you see here? The next question would be, what is really happening here? Here meaning the picture that's being shown. And then how does this relate to our lives? What is this picture relate to your life here in this community? And the next is, why does this situation, concern, or strength exist? Why is this here? Why is this problem here? Right? And then, now, what can we do about it? So, if you remember your Lasallian reflection framework, no, it's something like that. It's very similar to that. No, you observe, you reflect on what's happening, right? You kind of critically think about why this is existing in a particular place, and then of course you ask what can be done about this. And then the photo voice process ends with the participants sharing the photographs and stories with policymakers and community leaders, and kind of asking their commitment to address the gaps that are found or are identified in the photo voice. Now, there are photo voice research reports when they're already published, whose main idea is that the interview is the main thing that they analyze. There are those photo voice studies that integrates the photos together with the interviews. But integrating the photos with the interviews in the report is not required, but integrating the photos in the presentation with the policymakers and the community leaders, very important. Again, because visuals, when you place them in the report, they're more striking and they can really compel the leaders to commit. And then the third one that we're going to be discussing is Photostories. Not very popular. Not very much articulated, as this is the design that we use, because there are many characteristics of Photostories or photohistorias that are closely related to both photo-elicitation and Photostories. But the maker or the conceptualizer of Photostories, the one who proposes this, who is Gomez, they argue that this is related to, this is similar in a way, but it has a distinction from photo voice and photo-elicitation. And I put this last because, again, there's an argument that I am methodologically different from these two different designs. So Photostories builds upon the power of participatory photography and participated generated image as a part of research process. So they argue that this sector is the photo voice part, and the power of photo-elicitation techniques that introduce images into the research interview for guided insight, perspective, and depth. So the argument here by Gomez is that in Photovoice, the goal is community empowerment, transformation through participation and research process. And I would agree here, um, there has to be some form of community building, empowerment, campaigning, advocating for the community or the minoritized people that you are engaging in the Photo Voice process. That is important because that's part of Photo Voice's axiology. It's a participatory research. So, and then the image creation or the generation is from the participants, and we discussed that already. And then the image use is again for community empowerment and transformation, and not really describing what the story is, right? So it's more of, but I mean, you will tell the story eventually, but the bigger bulk of like what you need to discuss is like what are the social problems and what are the gaps that are found in the community and how it can be addressed to improve the well-being of the people in question. And then in photo elicitation, the goal is mainly to enrich research interview by inserting images for elicitation of new perspectives during the interview and in the research report. However, Gomez argue, and probably Gomez is the one that looks at photo elicitation as mostly taken by researchers or by third parties, meaning it is the researcher who took the photographs or the researcher got it from a pool of photographs that are already available. And probably Gomez does not consider participant-generated photo or participant-driven photo elicitation. So I would argue that participant-driven photo elicitation is closely related to photo historians. That's why I wanted to kind of differentiate that when you talk about photo elicitation, it is really researcher generated. Once it becomes participant generated, but it doesn't really have a critical or a political component, then maybe that is more of photo stories, right? And this is for research understanding. So again, for photo stories, what we want is to be able to interweave or integrate stories of the participants and the photos that they took. So again, think about participant-driven photo elicitation. And from now on, we're going to be calling them photo stories. And when you talk about photo elicitation, our stance would be it's researcher driven or the photos are taken from third parties, right? And it can complement and deepen the meanings of the story. So the goal of photo stories is to be able to tell the story of the participant. But while there is an indirect goal of, exposing social realities for them to be addressed by policymakers and community leaders, that's not the main thing. The main thing is really to tell their stories, to be able to and to deeply discuss or deeply understand the phenomenon through the photos and the pictures that are generated by the participant. And then by participants or by researchers guided by participants. No? So this is the image creation. And then for image use, basically it's not directed to community empowerment and transformation, but it's really for deeper or research understanding. So again, I'd like to implore that for our class, right? So photo stories is what we will mention when we talk about participant-driven PEI. Okay? So from now on, we'll talk about participant-driven PEI as photo stories. And then for photo elicitation, we talk about this as researcher-driven. Right? Now, if the participant-driven PEI has a goal of community empowerment, then that becomes Photovoice. I hope that makes it a little bit more distinct. So, photo stories procedure according to Gomez, the first one is field entry and recruitment of the participants. The second one is instruction and prompts that they will be answering or that they will be taking pictures of, and then photo collection by the participants. And then if they collect many pictures after the prompt, then you ask them to select the image, and then you kind of interview them based on the photos. The photo collection, according to Gomez, does not really mean that they take the picture, but it can be, for example, you can do photo stories with pictures that they already have in their phones or that they already have in social media, and then that will guide you in terms of how to drive the interview. So it doesn't have to be primary data that they take during the time that they are in the study, but it can be photos that they have taken or posted in the past. Or it can be a combination of both. You can ask them to take pictures of what they have now, and then also include in your interview as a prompt the pictures that they had before that were posted in social media or kept in their photo albums or kept in their phones or elsewhere. And then, of course, you have the analytic stage. You transcribe the interviews, you translate, and then you code. I think it's important here that the analysis is dialogic, meaning you analyze the data, the interviews, and the photos. And again, that is also what Photostories says, that it is distinct from Photovoice. Because again, in Photovoice, where our goal is to be able to elicit or make apparent the social issues that are found in the community or in a minoritized group. But there is no requirement for the Photovoice researcher to analyze the photographs, the visual data. The visual data is really more a part of data gathering, not really a part of the analysis. They have an option to include it in the analysis if they want to, but that they're not required to do that. In Photostories, there's some sort of requirement that when you analyze the narratives, you also analyze integratively the pictures. Okay, and then you do analysis, and then you write the report, and then dissemination. So for this video lecture, we talked about 3 particular photography-based research designs. We talked about photo-elicitation, we talked about Photovoice, and we talked about photo stories or photohistorias. We talked about what are the overlapping characteristics of these 3, aside from the fact that we're using photographs, and then we kind of forwarded where the distinctions lie between the 3 of them, so that when we converse around photo-elicitation, photo stories, Photovoice, we know the difference of the 3. And also, when we see that, a certain study would claim that they're Photovoice, but there are some components of Photovoice that it's not met, we kind of temper ourselves that, they're reporting themselves as a Photovoice, but some of them are not met, so maybe that's a limitation of the study. Same thing with Photostories and photo-elicitation. So, again, most of the concepts that we have, they're quite unstable in the literature, but at least for our class, let's have that understanding that these are the 3 and these are the distinctions, so that when you design your study, what do I want for my study? Do I want a Photovoice? Do I want more policy-driven, change-driven, empowerment-driven? Do I want photo-elicitation? Do I want to be the one doing the photographs or collecting the photographs and interviewing them based on those photographs? And then, I would do a photo stories. I will allow the participants to take the pictures or get the pictures from the collections that they already have and then interview them. And then think about, based on the research that you want to do, which one of those 3 would be best in terms of fitting your research question.